When you eat once a day, your body does not panic. It reorganizes. That is the first thing most people misunderstand. They imagine fasting as empty. But biologically, it is a switch. And when that switch flips, the body begins moving through a very specific sequence. For the first part of the day after your meal, your system is still handling the incoming fuel. Glucose is circulating, insulin is active, and your body is still deciding where every bit of energy should go. You have probably felt this part without even thinking about it. Right after a meal, you feel settled, steady, and almost insulated from hunger. That is not random. It is what happens when insulin is high and the body is still managing the incoming load. Insulin is doing a very specific job here. It keeps energy moving into storage, not out of it. While that signal is high, your body is not reaching for its deeper reserves. It is using the energy that just arrived. As the hours pass, that easy fuel starts to fade. The meal is no longer the main story. Your body begins leaning on glycogen, the short-term stored sugar kept in the liver and muscles. If you have ever felt that moment where you are not exactly starving, but you can tell the meal is no longer carrying you, that is the shift. Glycogen is being used down, and the body is moving from immediate fuel to backup fuel. And this is where hunger gets loud. Most people think that feeling is proof they are failing. It is not. It is simply the body noticing that the fast, easy fuel is no longer flooding the system. You feel it as a rumble, a distraction, maybe a little irritability. The body is not breaking. It is switching gears. By around hour 12, the pattern changes again. Insulin falls lower, and the body becomes more willing to tap into stored fat. If you may not notice the shift as a dramatic event, more often it shows up as a change in how your energy feels. The edge comes off the hunger, the spikes calm down, and the body starts relying on a different source of fuel. That shift is bigger than most people realize. The body is no longer just processing a meal. It is changing fuel source. And once the brain senses that fuel is coming more from stored energy, it starts adapting too. The chemistry changes. The feeling changes. The whole system gets quieter, then sharper. Now the most interesting part begins. Because when food stays out of the picture long enough, the body starts doing something that looks less like feeding and more like maintenance. By this point, you are no longer just waiting until you eat again. You are moving into a state where the body has to decide what gets used, what gets saved, and what gets cleaned up. That is one reason fasting has drawn so much scientific attention. But here is the part that keeps the debate alive. Is the body simply burning stored fuel, or is it also changing the repair environment at the same time? That question matters more than most people think. And the answer becomes a lot more visible once the fast goes deeper. When the fast goes deeper, the body stops acting like a system that is simply waiting for the next meal. Now that it starts acting like a system under pressure to adapt. You can see this in the way people describe longer fasts. But first it feels like effort. Later, if the transition goes well, it can feel strangely calm. The body is no longer expecting constant arrivals. It begins operating with what it already has. That change matters because your body is built to survive scarcity, not constant overflow. And once the incoming food stream is gone long enough, the chemistry begins to shift towards stored fuel and internal maintenance. Around this stage, glycogen is getting lower, insulin is staying down, and fat becomes a much more important fuel source. Body fat is not just extra tissue sitting there. It is reserve energy the body can call on when food is not coming in. That is where ketones enter the picture. Ketones are produced by the liver from fat, and they give the brain a different kind of energy to work with. If you have ever had one of those moments where mental fog starts to lift after a long stretch without food, this is part of why. Body fat is no longer dealing with the same constant push and pull from incoming meals. It is adjusting to a steadier internal fuel supply. That is one reason people talk about a mental shift during longer fasts. Ketones are part of those. The noise can drop. The body is no longer bouncing between constant arrivals and constant storage. But fuel is only half the story. The more interesting question is what happens to the repair side of the cell when feeding compresses into one window. That is where autophagy keeps entering the conversation. The research suggests fasting can induce adaptive autophagy, although the timing, strength, and tissue-specific effects are still being studied. This is where the body starts making trade-offs that are easy to miss from the outside. A system that is constantly fed is always deciding where to store, where to send, and what to hold on to. A system that is fasting has to simplify. It becomes more selective. It starts prioritizing survival and maintenance over immediate intake. Some researchers also point to growth hormone changes during fasting. A 2024 analysis found that fasting interacts with baseline human growth hormone levels, and the fasting intervention improved insulin resistance in certain participants without major weight loss differences. That does not mean growth hormone is a magic answer. It means the signal environment is changing in a way that may help the body protect lean tissue, while the fuel environment changes. That creates the contradiction most people miss. OMAD is often described as one simple trick for fat loss, but the biology is not that simple. In some people, it may improve fuel flexibility, while in others it can raise stress, hunger, or metabolic strain if the overall context is wrong. And that leads to the real blind spot. If the body can adapt this well to scarcity, why do some people feel better within hours while others feel worse almost immediately? But the body does not respond to scarcity the same way in every person. That is the part most people skip. They assume OMAD is one universal mechanism, one universal result. But the research is more mixed than the headlines suggest. In one controlled trial, 1 meal per day lowered body mass, lowered fat mass, and increased fat oxidation during exercise without harming strength or aerobic capacity. Yet the same pattern of eating is not automatically ideal for every body, every stress level, or every metabolic starting point. Think about two people trying the same routine. One is sleeping well, recovering well, and starting from a stable metabolic baseline. The other is stressed, underslept, and already struggling with energy. They are not walking into the same physiology, even if they are following the same eating pattern. But the research is more mixed than the headlines suggest. It is also about the state of the rest of the body. But the body does not too low, poor recovery, insulin resistance, and low nutrient reserves all change the way the system responds. A useful analogy is a power grid under load. If the grid is stable, rerouting power can make the system more efficient. If the grid is already strained, the same rerouting can expose weak points that were hidden before. But the research is more mixed than the headlines suggest. While others report irritability, dizziness, or fatigue, the biology is not contradicting itself. It is revealing the starting condition. The autophagy conversation fits into that same pattern. The evidence suggests fasting can stimulate adaptive autophagy through energy-sensing pathways like AMPK and suppression of mTOR, but the effect depends on duration and context. Here is the key detail. Repair is not automatically better just because it is happening. Too much stress, too little recovery, or too little food can turn an adaptive response into a problem instead of a benefit. That is why the same OAM pattern can look elegant in theory and messy in real life. Biology cares about context. It cares about reserve. It cares about whether the body is being asked to adapt from a strong position or from a depleted one. And this is where the day-to-day experience matters. In the first few days without sugar or bread, a lot of people feel a strange pull, almost like something is missing. The craving can feel physical, not just emotional. That does not mean you are doing something wrong. It often means your body is adjusting to a different rhythm, and that transition usually gets easier after a few days. Too much stress, too little food, can 12 people at the table. If you are already eating and you are genuinely unsure whether to repeat, do not repeat. Most of the time, the first sign of satisfaction is the real one, and repeating out of habit is usually easier than stopping on purpose. And that leads to the missing piece most people never hear. The question is not simply whether fasting works. The deeper question is whether your system has enough resilience to use the signal without being overwhelmed by it. Your body has been signaling this for longer than you think. Now you know how to see it. This content is for educational purposes only and is not medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you have a health condition, take medication, are pregnant or breastfeeding, or are unsure whether a fasting approach is appropriate for you, please speak with a qualified healthcare professional. If this changed how you think about your body, subscribe and explore the rest of the series in the description below.